Hi, my name is Rick Bloodworth. This is the Common Sense Christian Patriot channel, and today we're going to be talking about the pioneering spirit. I think it's a spirit that all of us need to have, and it's one that really excites the imagination when you think about it. Most of us, when we were growing up as kids, really enjoyed reading about our history in 19th century America, when there were so many people that were migrating from the east to the west by wagon train. The east had gotten more and more populated. The industrialization had begun, and the big cities were now starting to get polluted. And they also had a number of other problems with higher crime. It wasn't safe for a lot of people to be there with their families, and people just wanted a fresh start. There are always those who have the pioneering spirit that goes beyond just wanting to get away from something bad. They're excited by a new challenge. And so a lot of people, just the idea of going west, young man, as Horace Greeley once said, was enough just to stir the blood to an imagination that eventually culminated in making a decision to actually make the move, to actually do it. Now, this type of people, this breed of men and women who are willing to leave the known of their homes for something that was unknown, that was a very special type of individual. Can't you imagine the pushback they would have got from their families that they were leaving behind? The families would have no doubt heard of all the struggles that the pioneers were having on their trip from the east to west, the dangers from Indians, the dangers from the weather, the dangers from disease. Just a myriad of different challenges faced them. A lot of people, in fact, did not make this trip. And so the warnings that the families would have given, the friends would have given to those who were leaving would have been genuine warnings. There were real risks. There were very many people who simply left. They sold everything they had, they risked everything they had, and they lost on that big gamble. But there were a lot of people who didn't. There were a lot of people who were able to make the challenges of the trip and were able to make it to a modern day version of the promised land that the Israelites went to thousands of years earlier. Can you imagine what it must have been like for the people on those wagon trains to finally reach their destination? Maybe they were heading all the way to the West Coast, to California, to Oregon, to these territories that were pristine and fresh, green. The land would seemingly grow anything, feed any type of wild stock that you wanted to raise. Can you imagine what it must have been like for those people? Now imagine a lot of the early pioneers would have had their share of people who wanted to turn around when the going got tough. I can only imagine what it would have been like for those once winter started to set in, and maybe they hadn't made it over the mountain passes quite yet, and there would be some discouraged people. Maybe they had suffered attacks from the Indians of the lands that they were going through, and maybe they'd lost loved ones and just wanted to throw in the towel and go back home. I'm sure there were a lot of people who did return. But for those who made it, for those who persevered, the joy of and the freedom that they would have had, I suspect would have been incomparable. Something that we can only imagine today. Well, think about what the Israelites must have faced when they went through their own immigration from the land of Egypt. They were escaping slavery, a very real slavery. And they were headed towards a land that God had promised them, that was flowing with milk and honey. But as they went on their journey, many of them got discouraged by the challenges they faced. Most of them wanted to return home. And because of that, because they wanted to return home, even though God had told them something better was waiting for them, well, God had a punishment for them. They wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Most of the adults died, just really two, Joshua and Caleb, of those who left Egypt over the age of 20, actually made it to the Promised Land out of a nation of maybe 2 to 4 million people. Now, all the ones that were under the age of 20, they eventually did get to go into the Promised Land, and imagine what that must have been like for them. They trusted in God. They didn't allow the challenges to discourage them. And then when they made it, they truly were in a land flowing with milk and honey. Imagine what it must have been like as they came into that land and started viewing the areas that they would eventually settle in. There's a passage found in Hebrews chapter 11. It starts in verse 13. And after the inspired writer has talked about the people of the Old Testament times who had trusted in God enough to leave their homelands and go to a new land for the simple reason that they did trust in God, well, there was a tremendous reward for those people. And many of those people never made it to the promised land from a physical standpoint, but they were looking for something different. And Hebrews 11 explains that. Starting in verse 13, it says, all these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. And they admitted that they were aliens and strangers on earth. People who say such things show they're looking for a country of their own. If they'd been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Well, what was true of those people back during the Old Testament times is true for us today. God's prepared a place for us. It is a promised land. We won't see it this side of eternity, will we? And so it takes a tremendous amount of trust. The fact is that most people are not going to be willing to trust God enough to go through what they're going to need to go through to get there. Most people prefer the familiar, even if the familiar is unpleasant. Most people would prefer just to suffer the consequences for the sin that they find themselves involved with, if for no other reason than they're used to those consequences. And the thought of something new terrifies them. The thought of leaving the known in exchange for the unknown is just something they cannot do. The Israelites had that problem back during Old Testament times. There was a number of people in America that had that problem back during the 19th century in our history. And there are so many people today that have that problem. They are simply unwilling to exchange the familiar, even if the familiar is difficult and unpleasant, for something that is a promise of something that's better. But for those who have a pioneering spirit, for those who do trust in God, for those who have a vision, who can see beyond what lies just directly in front of their nose, but who can see the potential of the promise that God's given to us, for those people, heaven awaits. And there's something else, too, that I think is very important. We live in a world today that does have many different challenges. I suspect every era of people who have lived have had their own particular set of challenges, but we seem to be getting more and more as the days go by. A lot of people find themselves in situations of their own making. Maybe they've obtain some type of an addiction to drugs or to alcohol. Or maybe they're addicted to some other sin that's destructive to them, but they just can't see giving it up. You talk to any alcoholic, and when they finally are successful in giving up alcohol, it's very likely that they convince themselves that they just do it one day at a time, because the thought of not being able to get that alcohol again in the future was just too unbearable. It's the same for drug addicts. It's probably the same for everybody who's been addicted to any type of sin. The only way that we'll make that exchange, the only way we'll give up these things, is if we can see something better. God has promised us something far better. And if we can just leave the sins of this world and trust God enough to try it His way, well, in many ways we're going to enjoy a heaven here on earth, a promised land of our own. And it's not even necessarily the sinful things that sometimes people enslave themselves to, that people need a pioneering spirit to be able to escape it. Some people are so enmeshed in debt, and they can't see ever getting out of that debt. And so a lot of people have given up. They don't even try. They just keep the same destructive habits they've had. They just keep going in that direction that, even though they know is going to lead to a miserable existence, they just can't seem to give it up. And then think about the families. Think about a husband and a wife, or maybe a single parent who has children who maybe are starting to turn into teens and adults themselves, and they've gotten themselves involved in different things that are unacceptable, things that are destructive to them, things that are sinful. And yet the parent loves the child still, even if that child is an adult, and they don't want to do anything that might cause a rift in their relationship, and so they just tolerate what they're doing. They don't have the vision to see how much better it could be if they just started taking a firm stance now. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Some of y'all are in situations with your own families, with your own relationships that are, to be quite frank, subpar. They're not what they should be. But you keep hanging on to it. You keep hanging on to the bad things because you think that they are inextricably tied to the relationship, but they're not. You can take stands. You can put expectations, parents, upon your children. Spouses, you can put expectations, proper, godly expectations, upon your spouse. Not because they come from you, but because they in fact come from God. And you can insist that they uphold godly standards. And that's going to be hard. Think about what it was like for those who were wanting to go from the east to the west back during the Great Migration of the 19th century. They might have had to have sold everything they had and then outfitted themselves with a wagon and all the things that went along with that, and then actually get in that wagon and start going on that trip. That couldn't have been easy. They were filled with uncertainty, but they knew that they were going towards something better. When you and I find ourselves in a difficult situation, very often what we really need is just to trust in God. And we need a pioneering spirit, and by that I mean a vision to where we can see that things could be remarkably better if we would just change, if we would just do those difficult things that are required to enact that change. It's true. There will be times when you have a situation with a loved one where they're going on a destructive path. There will be some that refuse to leave that path. And because of that, by taking a stand, you might actually separate that relationship, at least for a time. Well, as difficult as that is, that's okay, because you have a vision of something better, and you want to be able to help them to get to a better place. But if they refuse, then you need to refuse to allow them to drag you to a bad place. And I think that's what so many people end up doing. It's like the people of the 19th century who were feeling trapped in the big cities. They were polluted, they were disease-ridden, they were dangerous. And yet when they had an opportunity to leave, they just couldn't do it because they hated to give up what they did have. Very often when we're involved with different things, whether it's addictions or heavy debt or a toxic relationship, we are very hesitant to do those things that would allow us to leave that bad situation. But we need to be able to trust in God. And we need to be able to do those things that will allow us someday to be in a better situation and allow our loved ones to be in a better situation. It will cost you something. It will be hard. Not everybody's going to buy into what you have bought into. But for those who are convinced that God's way is the best, and in fact the only way, for those who will turn their lives over to God, and by that I mean they start reading the Word of God and finding out what He wants us to do, and then we do it, well, we're going to find that our life begins to get better. And at the end of the journey, there's going to be a promised land waiting for us. We just have to stop viewing our little world as the only thing there is. We need to start having a vision of the heaven that awaits us. And along the way, we need to have a vision of the better life we can have while we remain here on earth, if we'll just start making those difficult changes that we know we need to make. Do you have the pioneering spirit? Do you have a vision of heaven? Do you trust God enough to help you to do the things that you know He wants you to do? If you do, well, get ready for two things. One, a difficult time for a while because there will be some sacrifices along the way. But two, get ready for a better life and get ready for the prospect of heaven someday. This world is not our home. We need to be like those people in Hebrews who admitted that this world isn't our home and are longing for a better country, a heavenly one that God has called us all to. Do you have that pioneering spirit within you? Well, that's it for today. Let me know what you think. I always enjoy the comments and I always try to respond to them, so please comment. If this is helpful to you, if this is the type of video that's helpful to you, do me a favor and subscribe and share it with other people so that the channel can get around to more people. It's a brand new channel just getting underway, and that'll help me a lot, and know that I certainly would appreciate your doing that. But for right now, I truly appreciate your sharing your time with me today, and I hope we'll see you again next time. God bless.